The last walk. There's something about walking at night that's always drawn me in. The quiet streets, the cool air, the way the world feels abandoned yet alive. It's a strange comfort, a kind of solitude I don't get during the day. But that night, I should have stayed home. It started like any other late-night walk. I'd had a long day at work, my head buzzing with thoughts I couldn't quiet. Around 11 p.m., I grabbed my hoodie, slipped on my sneakers, and stepped out into the cool autumn air. The streets were empty, just how I liked them. Street lights cast long shadows over the cracked sidewalks, and the occasional rustle of leaves reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. I wasn't worried. My neighborhood was quiet and safe. Or so I thought. I turned onto a street I didn't usually take, drawn by the way the full moon illuminated its tree-lined path. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike, and I let my mind wander as I walked. About 10 minutes in, I saw the figure. At first, I thought it was just another night walker like me. They were far ahead, barely visible in the dim light, moving at a slow, deliberate pace. Something about the way they walked was off. Their stride was too rigid, their movements too precise, like they were being controlled by invisible strings. I shook off the unease. People walk weirdly sometimes, I told myself. No big deal. But as I kept walking, I noticed something strange. No matter how far I walked or how fast I moved, the figure remained the same distance ahead. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my pace, determined to close the gap, but the figure didn't get any closer. It was like they were tethered to the horizon, always just out of reach. I called out, my voice echoing down the empty street. "Hey, are you okay?" The figure stopped. So did I. The air around me felt heavier, colder, as if the night itself was holding its breath. The figure stood motionless, and for a moment, I thought they might turn around. Instead, they stepped off the sidewalk and disappeared into the shadows of a nearby alley. Every instinct told me to turn around and go home. But something about the way they moved, so deliberate, so unnatural, filled me with a terrible curiosity. I approached the alley, my heart pounding. The shadows were thick, the dim light of the street lamps barely penetrating the darkness. "Hello!" I called, my voice trembling. No answer. I took a step into the alley, then another. My sneakers crunched on gravel, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. The air smelled damp, metallic, like rain on rusted metal. That's when I saw it. At the end of the alley was a wall covered in strange markings. They looked like scratches at first, jagged and chaotic, but as I stepped closer, I realized they formed symbols, twisted, interlocking shapes that made my head spin if I looked at them too long. In the center of the wall was a word, scrawled in dark, dripping paint. Stay. The moment I read it, the temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and a sound like distant whispering filled the air. I turned to leave, but the alley wasn't empty anymore. He stood at the entrance, silhouetted against the dim light of the street lamps. He wasn't the figure I'd seen before. This man was taller, broader, with limbs that seemed too long for his body. His head tilted slightly, as if studying me. "Can I help you?" I stammered, taking a step back. The man didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator sizing up its prey. Panic surged through me. I bolted toward the opposite end of the alley, but the air felt thick, like I was running through water. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, drowning out my own panicked breathing. When I reached the end of the alley, the street wasn't there. Instead, I found myself in another alley, nearly identical to the first. The same cracked pavement, the same damp smell, the same oppressive darkness. I turned around, but the man was gone. The whispers, however, were still there, closer now, more insistent. They weren't just random noises anymore. They were words. "Keep walking. Don't look back. You're almost there." I didn't know what there was, but I didn't want to find out. I ran blindly, turning corners at random, each alley blending into the next. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape. Every turn led me back to the same wall with the markings, the words "stay" mocking me. My phone was useless. No signal, no GPS, just a black screen that reflected my terrified face. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Not the slow, deliberate steps from before, but something faster, heavier. They echoed through the alleys, growing louder, closer. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself invisible. The footsteps stopped. A voice, low and gravelly, spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't have followed." I ran. I didn't care where I was going or what was chasing me. I just ran. The whispers turned into screams, the symbols on the walls seemed to glow, and the air felt like it was closing in. I tripped and fell, scraping my hands on the rough pavement. When I looked up, The shadow man was standing over me, his face hidden in darkness. He reached out, his hand impossibly long and skeletal, and I knew I was out of time. I woke up on my couch. The morning sun streamed through the window, birds chirped outside, and everything seemed normal. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream. But then I saw them, muddy footprints leading from my front door to the couch. And on the wall above my television, scrawled in dark, dripping paint, was a single word. Stay. The Lake Road. I've always been a night owl. There's something about the quiet hours after midnight that feels like my own secret world. When I couldn't sleep, I'd go for walks, sometimes around my neighborhood, other times exploring roads I hadn't ventured down before. That night, I decided to take a route I'd avoided for years, the Old Lake Road. It was infamous in town, mostly for urban legends. People claimed strange things happened to those who walked there at night. Shadowy figures, whispers from the water, inexplicable disappearances. I never believed any of it. I thought it was just a way to scare kids from wandering too close to the water. But curiosity got the better of me. The lake road was quieter than I expected, even for midnight. It was a narrow, winding path, flanked by thick woods on one side and the dark expanse of the lake on the other. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of moss and decay. The moon reflected off the still surface of the water, giving the entire scene an eerie silver glow. As I walked, the usual hum of crickets and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an oppressive silence. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud, each one echoing in the stillness. That's when I saw the light. It flickered in the distance, a faint, golden glow bobbing along the edge of the lake. At first, I thought it was someone else walking, maybe a fisherman or a camper. "Hello!" I called, my voice breaking the silence. The light paused, as if whoever was holding it had heard me. Then it started moving again, toward the woods. Curiosity prickled at the back of my mind. I quickened my pace, following the light as it disappeared into the trees. The woods were darker than I anticipated, the canopy blocking out most of the moonlight. I used my phone's flashlight to navigate, though its beam felt weak and fragile against the surrounding darkness. The light led me to a small clearing. At its center was an old, crumbling stone well. The lantern hung from a hook above it, swaying gently in a non-existent breeze. There was no one there. I approached the well cautiously, the hairs on my arms standing on end. Peering inside, I saw only darkness, so deep and impenetrable that it felt like staring into a void. Then I heard it, a soft, wet whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder, forming words. "Help me!" I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering. The whisper came again, more desperate this time. "Please help me." My throat went dry. "Who's there?" The whisper turned into a low, guttural laugh, echoing from the depths of the well. The lantern's light flickered violently, casting long, shifting shadows across the clearing. I turned to run, but the path I'd come from was gone. The trees seemed to close in around me, forming an impenetrable wall. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of footsteps. They came from all around me, slow and deliberate, crunching the fallen leaves. I spun in place, my flashlight darting from one shadow to the next. That's when I saw them, figures emerging from the trees, their faces obscured by the darkness. There were dozens of them, their movements unnaturally smooth, like they were gliding over the ground. One of them stepped closer, its head tilting at an unnatural angle. In the faint light, I could see its face, pale, hollow, with empty eye sockets that seemed to watch me. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered, its voice overlapping with dozens of others. I ran. The clearing melted into a maze of trees and shadows, the figures closing in from every direction. The whispers followed me, a cacophony of voices urging me to stop, to listen, to join them. My phone died suddenly, plunging me into total darkness. The only light came from the lantern, now floating in the distance like a beckoning star. With no other choice, I followed it. The light led me to a narrow wooden bridge that stretched over a misty inlet of the lake. The water below was unnaturally still, its surface like black glass. The lantern hovered at the far end of the bridge, illuminating a figure standing there. It was a woman, her back to me, her long, dark hair flowing unnaturally in the still air. She wore a white dress, tattered and stained, and her arms hung limply at her sides. "Hello!" I called, my voice shaking. She didn't move. I stepped onto the bridge, the wood creaking beneath my weight. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. When I was halfway across, she turned. Her face was a nightmare, pale and bloated, her empty eyes leaking water. Her mouth hung open in a silent scream, dark water pouring from her lips. I froze, my body refusing to move. The whispers stopped, replaced by her voice, a low, hollow sound that seemed to echo from the depths of the lake. "Join me," she said, extending a hand. The water below began to ripple, and hands, pale, skeletal, emerged from the surface, reaching for the bridge. I turned and ran, the bridge swaying violently beneath me. The hands clawed at my ankles, pulling me down, but I kicked free and stumbled onto solid ground. The lantern flickered and went out, plunging everything into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the laughter, soft and wet, rising from the water. I don't know how I made it back to the road. One moment I was in the woods, and the next, I was standing on the asphalt, drenched and shaking. A passing car stopped, the driver rolling down the window. "You okay, kid? You're lucky to be alive, walking that road at night." He didn't wait for a response, gesturing for me to get in. I didn't argue. As we drove away, I looked back at the lake road. The trees seemed to watch me, their shadows shifting in the moonlight. When I got home, I found something in my pocket that hadn't been there before, a small, waterlogged lantern. Inside the glass was a single word, etched in dripping letters: return.